The day of my brother's wedding, I wore a plain navy dress and kept my hair down. No uniform, no rank. Just his older sister, trying to take up as little space as possible. I had been doing that for years. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon at Vancouver General Hospital. And until 8 months ago, my family thought I was a nursing assistant who could never seem to hold down a steady job. That last part wasn't entirely their fault. It was mine. I let them believe it, because every time I tried to explain, no one was listening. Let me go back. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, the second of 3 kids. My brother Daniel was the golden one. Varsity hockey, full scholarship to Western. The kind of kid who made my parents tear up at dinner just by existing. My sister Renee was the youngest, the one everyone protected. And then there was me, the middle child who read too much and asked too many questions and never quite fit the shape my parents had imagined for their family. When I was 19, I told my parents I wanted to go to medical school. My father looked up from his newspaper, nodded slowly, and said, "That's a long road, Claire. A very long road. Are you sure you're that kind of person?" I didn't know what kind of person he meant. I said yes anyway. By 21, I was in my second year of undergrad at U of T, working 30 hours a week at a hospital supply warehouse to cover what my student loans didn't. I wasn't home much. When I was, my mother would ask how school was going, and I would say, "Fine." And she would say, "Just fine?" with a tone that made it clear she was already comparing me to Daniel, who had just been accepted to law school and had a girlfriend their friends adored. I stopped correcting the comparisons after a while. It was easier. When I got into medical school, I told them at a Sunday dinner. My mother asked how long it would take. I said 4 years for the degree, then residency. She put down her fork. "So you'll be 40 before you're actually working," she said. Not cruelly. Just as a fact she was filing away somewhere. My father said, "We're proud of you," in the same voice he used when he said drive safe, reflexive, automatic, already moving on to something else. I nodded and passed the potatoes. The years that followed were the hardest of my life and the most clarifying. Medical school in Toronto, residency in Calgary, a fellowship in trauma surgery that took me to Montreal for 18 months. I moved a lot. I called when I could. My mother sent Christmas cards to whatever address I gave her. My father asked, occasionally, if I was still doing the hospital thing. Daniel got married, made partner at his firm, bought a house in Oakville. Renee finished a business degree and moved back home for 2 years before getting a job in marketing in Hamilton. When they talked about the family at gatherings, the kind of easy, warm shorthand families used to describe their own, Daniel was the lawyer, Renee was the marketing girl, and I was Claire, she moves around a lot, works in healthcare somewhere. I was performing emergency surgery on gunshot wounds and motor vehicle accidents. I had a team. I had a patient list. I had a salary that would have made my father's eyes go wide if I had ever told him. But I had stopped telling him things a long time ago, and so the silence had calcified into a story they told themselves. And the story was, Claire never really landed anywhere. I want to be honest about something. Part of that was my fault. I know that. I was proud in a way that became its own kind of wall. Every time I thought about calling to announce a milestone finishing residency, getting my fellowship, getting the staff position at VGH, I would think about my father's reflexive "we're proud of you" and my mother's "so you'll be 40 before you're actually working," and something in me would go quiet. I wanted them to see it, not hear about it. I wanted them to know me, not my credentials. That is a foolish thing to want from people who are not looking. I understand that now. The week before Daniel's wedding, I flew back to Mississauga from Vancouver. I had taken 5 days off, which was not a small thing in my line of work. I had a gift, a card, a navy dress. I was ready to be a good sister and a quiet presence, and to leave without incident. My mother picked me up from the airport. In the car, before we had even left the terminal loop, she said, "Claire, I need you to not make this weekend about yourself." I looked at her. I wasn't planning to. "You know how you get," she said. "Distant. Like you're somewhere else. It makes Daniel uncomfortable." I turned to look out the window. "Okay," I said. That was Thursday. Friday was the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant in Burlington. A nice place, exposed brick, Edison bulbs, the kind of menu that lists where the beef was raised. Daniel's fiancée, Meredith, was warm and organized and clearly the reason anything was running smoothly. Her family was large and loud in a generous way, the kind of family that laughs at the same time and means it. I liked them immediately. I was seated at the far end of the rehearsal table, between one of Meredith's aunts and an empty chair that turned out to belong to a cousin who arrived late and spent most of dinner on his phone. My mother sat near the center, next to Daniel, where she kept reaching over to straighten his collar even though it didn't need straightening. At some point, my father gave a short toast. He talked about Daniel's drive and dedication. He talked about how proud they were. He mentioned Renee, who was a bridesmaid, and said she had grown into such a poised young woman. He did not mention me. I don't think it was intentional. I think I simply wasn't in the part of his mind where the toast came from. I raised my glass with everyone else. That night, in the guest room of my parents' house, I lay on the twin bed I had slept in as a teenager and looked at the ceiling and thought about the patients I had left in other hands for 5 days and whether I had made the right call on a post-op complication before I flew out, and I fell asleep before I could finish the thought. The wedding was Saturday afternoon, a venue in Hamilton, the kind of restored heritage building that costs a great deal and photographs beautifully. Meredith was stunning. Daniel cried when he saw her, which surprised everyone, and I think it was the most honest thing I had ever seen him do. The ceremony was lovely. I sat in the third row on the groom's side, next to one of Daniel's law school friends I had met once before. We smiled at each other and watched my brother get married, and it was genuinely, quietly beautiful. The trouble came at the reception. It was during the cocktail hour, before dinner was served. I was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water, talking to Meredith's mother, who was asking me about Vancouver with genuine curiosity, when my father appeared beside me. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he said. It wasn't a question. I excused myself and followed him a few steps away, toward the window that looked out over the venue's garden. "I need you to not hover around the head table tonight," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "You keep drifting toward it. Meredith's family is there. Daniel's partners from the firm are there. I need tonight to look a certain way. I'm Daniel's sister," I said. "I know who you are, Claire." He said it quietly, firmly, in the tone he had always used when he felt he was being patient with me. "But these people don't know you, and when they ask what you do and you say you work in healthcare, it sounds..." He paused. "It just doesn't sound like much. And tonight is important." I felt something cold move through my chest. Not surprise, exactly, but something that had been soft becoming hard. "So you want me to stay away from the people who matter," I said. "I want you to be aware of the impression you make." I put my glass down on the nearest table. I thought about all the things I could have said in that moment, all the words that had been accumulating for a decade, all the corrections I had never made, all the Sunday dinners and airport pickups and Christmas cards addressed to healthcare somewhere. I thought about the 18-hour shifts and the attendings who had called me by my last name, like a mark of respect, and the morning in Calgary when I had kept a 24-year-old alive on a table for 6 hours and then gone to the parking lot and sat in my car for 20 minutes because I didn't know what else to do. I thought about all of it. And then I picked up my glass, smoothed the front of my dress, and said, "Okay, Dad." I turned toward the door. I was 3 steps away when I heard someone say my name. Not my father, someone else. "Claire?" I turned. It was Marcus Meredith's brother. We had met briefly at the rehearsal dinner the night before. He was a quiet man, a few years older than me, with the kind of stillness that usually means someone has been in a high-pressure environment long enough to stop wasting energy on noise. We had talked for about 10 minutes about the Vancouver food scene and whether the Canucks had any real hope this season, and I had liked him. He was looking at me with an expression I didn't immediately recognize. Then he said, more quietly, "Are you Dr. Claire Sutherland? From VGH?" My father had not yet walked away. I said yes. Marcus turned slightly, looked between me and my father, and I could see him reading the room very quickly. He had that skill. I would learn later that he'd had years to develop it. "I'm sorry," he said to my father, with a politeness that was somehow also entirely firm. "Do you know what your daughter does?" My father made a small sound. "She works in healthcare. She's the head of trauma surgery at Vancouver General," Marcus said. He wasn't loud. He wasn't performing. He was just stating something that was true and apparently needed to be stated. She was lead surgeon on the protocol that changed how we handle multi-system trauma cases in BC. I work in health policy for the province. Her work is in every briefing I read. The room had not gone quiet. No one else heard this conversation. It was just 3 people near a window, and outside the garden was gold in the late afternoon light, and my brother was somewhere across the room being congratulated by people in nice suits. My father looked at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't, he started. I know, I said. And I meant it both ways. The dinner that followed was long and warm and full of speeches, and I sat at my assigned table and ate the salmon and talked to the people around me and laughed when something was funny, and was quiet when I needed to be quiet. Marcus stopped by the table once during dessert to introduce me to Meredith's uncle, who was a hospital administrator in Ottawa and wanted to ask me about the protocol. We talked for 20 minutes. I felt like myself in a way I hadn't felt in that city in a long time. My father came to find me near the end of the evening, when the dancing had started and the lights had gone low and warm. He stood next to me for a moment without saying anything, watching Daniel and Meredith on the dance floor. "Why didn't you tell us?" he finally said. It wasn't quite an accusation and wasn't quite a question. It was something in between. The thing people say when they're trying to decide whether to be hurt or ashamed. "I tried," I said. "A few times. Early on. I kept my eyes on my brother. You were busy being proud of Daniel." He didn't answer that. "I should have tried harder," I added. And I meant that too. I had made choices that kept me small in their eyes because I was tired of asking to be seen. That wasn't only his fault. I had been stubborn in my own way, and stubborn has its own costs. "Your mother is going to want to call you," he said after a while. "I know." "She doesn't," we didn't know. "I know, Dad." He put his hands in his pockets. Across the room, Daniel was laughing at something Meredith's father had said, his whole face open and easy, the way he had always been. And I watched my father watch his son, and I understood something I had maybe always known but never let myself sit with. My father loved all of us. He just had a very limited idea of what love was allowed to look like. That doesn't fix anything, but it changes what you're carrying. The next morning was Sunday. I had a flight back to Vancouver at noon. My mother made eggs and toast, and we sat at the kitchen table, the three of us. For the first time in I couldn't tell you how long. My mother asked me questions I had never been asked before, real questions, curious ones, about the hospital and the cases and what the fellowship had been like and where I lived in Vancouver. She asked them carefully. The way you ask questions when you know you should have asked them years ago and you're not sure how to acknowledge the gap. I answered them. Fully. For once. Not to prove anything. Just because she was asking. At one point she said, "I wish we had known," and I could hear that she meant it. And I also know that knowing and paying attention are different skills. And I didn't say that because it was Sunday morning, and my brother had just gotten married and some things can wait. At the airport, my father hugged me before I went through security. It was a real hug, the kind that means something is trying to be communicated through the contact that can't quite make it into words yet. "Come home at Christmas," he said. "I'll try," I said. "It depends on the schedule." He nodded. He was learning what that meant. On the plane, somewhere over the Rockies, I looked out at the mountains below and thought about a version of this story where I had made different choices, where I had shown up to that Sunday dinner at 21 with my acceptance letter and insisted on being seen, or where I had called every milestone in from the road and made them witness it, or where I had let myself need them out loud instead of in the private, unanswered way I had been doing for years. I don't know if that version goes better. It might have saved some time. It also might have broken something that was fragile enough to still be worth keeping. What I know is this. My brother got married on a Saturday afternoon in Hamilton in a beautiful old building, and the light was gold, and he cried when he saw his bride, and at some point a quiet man near a window told my father who his daughter was, and something shifted. Not everything. Not all at once. But something. I got back to Vancouver on Sunday evening. I was in the OR by 7 Monday morning. The resident on my team asked how the trip was, and I said it was good. And she nodded and handed me the chart, and we got to work. That's the thing about the life I built. It was always there, solid and real and entirely mine, whether anyone was watching or not. It didn't need the wedding to make it true. But I think I needed the wedding to finally let someone see it.